Good evening. Welcome to Appleton Historical Society's Wednesday night presentation series in partnership with the Appleton Public Library. My name is Gwen Sargent, and I have the privilege of being the president of Appleton Historical Society. Our thanks to the Appleton Public Library for the use of the Mary Beth Ninehouse Community Room, and to Katie Stilp, our board member, who helps us set up and coordinate these presentations. Now on to our presentation, the history of the Appleton Police Department. Presenter Mark Keller is a retired sergeant of the Appleton Police Department, where he proudly served the community from 1974 to 2004. His appreciation for the department's rich history was inspired by working alongside Arnie Netikoven, the unofficial historian of the APD. Retired Detective Sergeant Netikoven served the department from 1960 to 1990, and during that time began collecting newspaper articles and researching APD history during his personal time. His dedication laid the foundation for the APD History Museum. Netikoven also authored a book on Appleton law enforcement history, 1850 to 2000. Following in Arnie's footsteps, Mark has embraced the role of APD historian himself, continuing the important work of gathering and preserving materials for the APD History Museum to ensure that the legacy of Appleton's law enforcement is honored for generations to come. Thank you, Mark. We look forward to your presentation.
Wow, I know I didn't send that to you. My name is Mark Keller. I'm a retiree from the Appleton Police Department and currently a volunteer at the Appleton Police Department. A little about myself is I was hired in 1974. I held a variety of different jobs while on the department for 30 years. I started as a beat walker, where during those days, we all started. I was one of the first police school liaison officers. I worked in the identification section for 10 years. In my last 9 years, I was a field training officer in the patrol division. As such, I was Chief Olson's primary FTO when she was hired. I was also the department forensic artist from 1990 until I retired in 2004. I would be remiss if I didn't give credit where credit is due, and that would be with the man who started our history museum, that being Arnie Netikoven. Arnie was an officer with the Appleton Police Department, as Gwen had mentioned, from 1960 until 1990. He achieved the rank of detective sergeant. During that time, he developed an interest for APD history and started doing some digging, as detectives like to do. His interest soon became a passion, so much so that he started collecting APD memorabilia. He also wrote a book, Appleton, Wisconsin Law Enforcement History, 1850 to 2000. It is over 700 pages in length. There's a copy of it back on one of the display tables. And his collection of memorabilia is on display at the Appleton Police Department in 11 different display cases. We continue to collect items for our museum and have more items now than we can display. Arnie's passion for APD history was contagious. I have to admit, now I have it. I would meet Arnie either at his home or at the police department, even during COVID. Arnie always had an agenda, something he wanted to show me, something he wanted to tell me, or something he wanted me to do. Quite frequently, when I would leave Arnie, I had an assignment. Arnie was the true APD historian, and for that I am thankful. So, on to APD history. Appleton, Wisconsin was incorporated as a village in April of 1853, and later into a city in April of 1857. Law enforcement in the early days consisted of a village marshal, and then in 1857, a city marshal. The marshals were elected every year. The village marshal, or the very first village marshal, was Daniel Huntley, a school teacher. Mr. Huntley was again elected as the first city marshal and served for 1 year. The village had neither a police department nor a jail of its own. Borrowing a neighboring lockup when the rare occasion demanded, after the first Outagamie County Jail was built in April of 1854, the story goes that Appleton's first paddy wagon was a wheelbarrow, used mostly to trundle drunks off to jail. Records show that the city was reluctant to organize a police department. At the insistence of the county board, the 1869 City Council voted in January of that year to establish a permanent police department. The decision provided for one marshal and such policemen as thereafter should be needed. As the city grew, so did the need for police officers. In January of 1869, the city passed an ordinance establishing the permanent police department. The first police officer was George Weber. Officers were appointed each April for a 1-year term. Officers worked 12-hour shifts from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 days a week, and were paid $2 for each day worked. The city had one officer on duty until 1877, when a second officer was appointed. This additional officer was paid $1.75 per day. Wow, how times have changed. In September 1870, the first police station was in the 100 block of North Oneida Street. It was a two-story wooden structure. By 1884, the department had 3 patrolmen besides the marshal. And by 1895, the force had grown to 8 men. 6 of these officers walked night beats throughout the city, and the marshal and 1 other worked daytime duty. Up until 1890, the city paid small monthly allowances to its lawmen, which in 1869 was $2 per day. Businessmen made up the difference as the need became relevant that they needed to be paid more. And businesses made up that difference. The feeling was that they had more to lose, so they were happy to make up that difference. In 1891, the local newspaper had articles to show how officers had to use a wheelbarrow to convey drunks to jail, and the need for a patrol wagon persisted. In 1897, the city appointed a police and fire commission who set up rules for hiring police officers. Requirements set forth by the PFC were officers had to be between 21 and 55 years of age. They had to have the ability to read and write, the ability to do arithmetic. Sound familiar? Basics of education, reading, writing, and arithmetic. They had to be at least 5 feet 8 inches tall and weigh a minimum of 140 pounds. All members on the department at that time passed except one. Ed Finnegan was 65 years old. Finnegan was then appointed to the director of the Poor Farm. In 1898, the new Police and Fire Commission took over testing, making appointments to the department. From that time on, appointments were permanent, no longer just for a year. In July of 1900, after an officer was fired by the department, the city marshal hired a replacement. The city mayor objected, feeling the responsibility of hiring and firing officers was his. This led to an all-day hearing in front of the PFC, both parties having legal representation. The PFC concluded that the city marshal had the right to hire new officers who then needed approval of the Police and Fire Commission. That practice was important because other departments throughout the state adopted that same philosophy and same rule as far as hiring officers, that the chief of police had the authority and the power to hire, but they needed approval of the Police and Fire Commission before they were appointed. The city brought its first police patrol wagon in September of 1900. It was drawn by one horse. Sylvester, Vet as he was called, Walsh, was appointed as the first patrol driver, who was on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He was allowed 1 half day off or 2 half days off per week. The wagon and horse were kept at Firehouse Number 1. The patrol driver also lived at Firehouse Number 1 and was paid $55 per month. In 1908, the patrol wagon was manned by 2 policemen and drawn by 2 horses. The first 2 captains in 1902 were appointed to the police department. They were William Baker and Michael Garvey. Michael Garvey would later go on to become the city marshal. In September 1911, the department acquired its first motorcycle. It was a 6-horsepower twin magneto model Excelsior motorcycle. For those of you who looked at the display tables on the back, there is a picture of that motorcycle, and during the winter months, it was adapted as a snowmobile. And Officer Delgin apparently was pretty handy with tools and helped in transferring that machine over to snowmobile use during the winter months. There was a daybook entry. If you notice, there were some daybooks back on some of those tables. Well, one of those daybooks has this entry. October 19th, 1911. Appleton motorcycle cop Michael Wagner nabs his first speeder. The first-time offender was traveling 25 miles per hour on State Street. He was brought to the police station and fined $14.20. It was $10 plus costs. In January of 1914, the second police station was at 816 Midway, which is a half block north of College Avenue and went between Oneida and Appleton Streets. That stretch of city street still exists. It's where we pay our taxes and our utility bills to the city of Appleton. In August 1914, the first motor patrol vehicle was acquired. The new motor ambulance patrol vehicle arrived on August 19th. It was a 50-horsepower Cadillac with frame constructed by Neville and Company of Oshkosh, one of the best carriage companies in the country in that day. It had a 134-inch wheelbase, a 7.5-foot rear box with benches on both sides. It was capable of speeds of 50 miles per hour and cost $2,665. The dual-purpose ambulance patrol vehicle replaced the horse-drawn transport wagon and was in service for 30 years. While on its way to Appleton, it was driven through the streets of Oshkosh. When the Oshkosh police chief saw it, he commented he wanted one. When the fire department was motorized in 1915, its horse stables were remodeled, and this became the police station, which was located at 808 Edwards Street. This later became known as Washington Street. If you look at this photograph, the top one to the right, you can see the 808. Okay, that's Chief Grimm and the officers who worked for the department at that time. From the beginning, all officers and marshals wore a 6-point star. However, in October 1915, the star was replaced with a shield or a badge. It was later returned to the 6-point star in December of 1926. More on this later. On January 18th, 1922, Appleton City Ordinance number 204 is passed. This authorized the police department to hire a female officer. In April of 1922, due to an increased number of incidents involving women, the police department hired its first female officer. Enter Mildred H. Gardner. She was appointed as the 18th officer to the department and filled this new position by then City Marshal George T. Prim. She did not wear a uniform. She was paid the same as male officers and was assigned a desk in the police station. It should be noted that seeing the need for a female police officer, the Appleton Women's Club lobbied for 5 years to the City Council, Circuit Court judges, and the Police and Fire Commission before Mildred was hired. It should also be noted that the 19th Amendment was ratified on June 10th of 1919. That amendment gave women the right to vote. After more than 2 years, on May 8th of 1924, Mildred resigns. Appleton City Ordinance 230 was passed, shortly thereafter repealing Ordinance 204. The next female police officer was hired in 1969. The Appleton Police Department's first of 2 line of duty deaths occurred on June 19th of 1926. Officer Alfred Dunn was chasing a speeder when his motorcycle hit uneven road. He was thrown from the bike and was treated for injuries of his arm and knee. The injuries were not considered serious at that time. On October 29th of 1926, Dunn was admitted to the hospital with pain in the area of his injuries. The doctors discovered that poisoning had set in and surgery was performed. Officer Dunn's condition worsened and he died November 2nd, 1926. Officer Dunn had served several years in law enforcement for various other agencies. He served the Appleton Police Department for 6 months before he passed. It should also be noted that Officer Dunn's father, Marshal Thomas Dunn, was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver 2 years prior while serving with the Hortonville Police Department. The list of marshals and police chiefs is long, with the earliest changing frequently since they were elected officials. The city did not recognize its department head as chief of police for many years. Only after 17 marshals, with a total of 76 years of service from 1853 to 1929, Marshal George T. Prim, who assumed his duties in 1917, was with a police force of 16 men, became the chief of police for the city of Appleton by council decree. Chief Prim served for 24 consecutive years until 1941. Only one other person, Fred Huffer, served longer with 27 years as marshal. So in January of 1929, the title of city marshal was officially changed to chief of police. The first official chief of police was George T. Prim, a retired lieutenant from the Chicago Police Department. Chief Prim served from 1888 to 1913 on the Chicago Police Department. He was hired as the city marshal of Appleton in 1917. He retired as chief of police in 1941. Chief Prim was the first to be hired for that position from outside the ranks. All previous marshals came up through the ranks, starting as an officer and working their way to the top. Chief Prim was a firm believer in the School of Instruction and encouraged officers to attend a half-hour session on instruction every 2 weeks. This half hour was an exchange of views on police matters. This brought about consistency on how situations or individuals were handled. It should be noted that the Appleton City Council sought Prim because of his previous work on the Chicago Police Department and because of his progressive ideas in policing. Another example for the need of education to his officers was demonstrated in a daybook entry which stated, by orders of Chief Prim, mandatory first aid class at vocational school for officers Knapp, Duval, Hoppy, Salzman, Kunitz, Blick, Maul, Van Roy, Hirschikorn, and Blessman. He encouraged officers to stay away from the saloon and the drink while on the job. You wouldn't hear that today, but apparently it was a thing back then. He urged his men to make their vocation as officers as respectable as merchants. 1937, after direction from the state of Wisconsin, officers were reassigned to work 8-hour shifts, getting away from the 12-hour shifts previously worked. Think they were happy? Yeah, I think so. In May 1950, the Appleton Police Department moved into its own building on the corner of Morrison and Washington Streets. At this time, the police force numbered 38 men, had 3 squad cars, and 6 motorcycles. By 1960, the station was enlarged considerably. The force had increased to 66 men, 18 crossing guards, 7 squad cars, and 11 motorcycles. On December 24th, 1955, Christmas Eve morning, the police department lost a second officer while on duty. Motorcycle officer Malon John Day was struck by a train and killed as he passed over the State Street Railroad crossing on his 3-wheeled motorcycle at approximately 11:30 a.m. Officer Dunn was a U.S. Navy veteran of World War II and the Korean War. He served with the Appleton Police Department for 2 years before he passed. On March 1969, Milwaukee-based department store Gimbel's decided to locate in Appleton. The police department moved to a temporary location on the corner of Appleton and Franklin Streets. They remained there until January 8th, 1976, when it was moved to their current location at 222 South Walnut Street. The original building was remodeled in 2010. This was the new location. That building was built around the existing station. Officers continued to work in that building while this was being built. I think that's amazing. Yeah. Which brings us to Chief David Gorski. Why David Gorski? Because the new building in 2010 was dedicated to him. I was thinking about why was the dedication to him? And I worked for Dave Gorski. Dave Gorski was a visionary. He was progressive in his policing, and he was very interested in training his officers and preparing them for what he saw was coming. When he saw something happening on the east and the west coast, that was like a wave that was coming our way. He wanted his officers prepared to handle what was coming by the time it got to us, and he did that, and he was very successful at that. Other programs that he was responsible for starting was the physical fitness program. That program is still in existence today. He knew that if officers were in better shape, they wouldn't use as many sick days. They would be, through the course of being in shape, they would handle stress better that the job brought, and there was incentive for them. If they took that test and ranked excellent in the 5 different facets of that test, they could stand to make a 2% increase in their base rate. He was also responsible for the police school liaison program. He was responsible for district policing, for community policing, for bicycle patrol. He was also instrumental in the 911 emergency system that we enjoy today. And if you remember, when that happened, it was supposed to be a joint effort between the city of Appleton and Outagamie County. Outagamie County was dragging their feet, and Gorski said, "We need this now." So he pushed ahead and got it for Appleton before the county had it. He was also responsible for women on the police department. I remember an all-department meeting to civilians and officers. In that address to the department, he made the statement that women will be hired to fill line positions, patrol positions in uniform. Further, that they would be promoted to supervisory positions. All of those positions prior to this, with the exception of one, were male officers. And the one that I speak of was in 1969, Maurice Griesbach was the second female police officer that was hired. She again was saddled to a desk and investigated juvenile crime. The third was Chris Larson Smith. She worked a desk in street clothes and was forbidden to wear a uniform. I remember sitting next to her during a historic moment on our department, and that would have been January 3rd of 2023, with the swearing in of the first female police chief for Appleton. I was sitting next to Chris, and I turned to her and I said, you know, Chris, you have to take credit for paving the way for this to happen today, because Chris, while she was hired to do street clothes work, during the course of her job and in promotions, she started wearing a uniform, first as a sergeant, then a lieutenant, eventually a captain, and retired with a district where she was in command of a district and officers serving under her. And she really paved the way for other female police officers to progress in the rank system. He was also responsible for field training program. Prior to that, all officers that were hired were certified with the state of Wisconsin. They then went back to their departments and attended some training within their department under their department training program covering department policies and procedures. Gorski wasn't happy with that program, and he patterned his field training program from Madison PD, where he saw that that program was very successful. And it gave checks and balances to the new officers, the new hires, that they all were treated the same way and received the same kind of training. It was a 4-step process, working with 3 different field training officers. They worked with the first training officers as their primary in phase 1, and they also went back to that primary field training officer in phase 4. He also brought accreditation to light for the department. What accreditation did for our department, it was held so that officers in certain positions were accountable for the positions they held, and they had to keep records of the work that they did so that they could meet those accreditation standards. What really impressed me most about Gorski was the family man that he was. I remember going to a session out at Fox Valley Tech. It was an in-service that everybody attended. What he wanted to know was what made his officers tick, what was important to them. He wanted to know about that. At the end of the day, the number one priority of all who attended was family. And he took that on as his responsibility as well. Family was important. When you would see Chief Gorski in the hallway or at the mailboxes, he knew your wife's name, he knew the names of your children. Family was important to him. So, enough about Gorski and why that department was, or why the new department was dedicated to him. Moving on to APD badges. Since July of 1875, the Appleton police officers wore 6-point stars as badges. In June 5th of 1916, the star was replaced with a shield, as the star was known to cut flesh during occasional scuffles. December 2nd, 1926, At the request of Police Chief Prim, the shield was replaced with another 6-point star. In Prim's word, the star, not the shield, is the official insignia of the police officer. Each point stands for something. At 12 o'clock and moving clockwise, we have integrity, service, knowledge, professionalism, teamwork, and courage. The current 6-point star, worn by current officers, was adopted in the summer of 1963. This brings us to shoulder patches. Appleton police officers wore a shoulder patch starting in December of 1961. It was a diamond-shaped black and gold patch worn on the left sleeve of officers' uniforms. The department changed to its second patch in February of 1966 and was worn on both uniform sleeves. The third patch was worn since May 13, 1996. The new and current patch, number 4, incorporates the city seal and became official in September of 2024. So this brings us to a point, so if you've got any questions, fire away. Anyone have any questions? Yes?
I'm wondering, under which police chief did the animal control officers and the community service officers begin?
That was under Chief Borski. I remember during a meeting, there were officers wanted to know, or the chief wanted to know from his officers, what are some areas that you feel are important that don't require a uniformed officer with arrest powers? One of their biggest gripes were dog complaints. CSO program started after that. Animal control was a runoff or a spin-off of the CSO program. Some of the personal cases that I worked on, how many of you remember David Spanbauer? Okay, there's a number of you. David Spanbauer was an evil man, and he was a serial killer. There were several times where the Appleton Police Department was involved, not knowing that there was a connection at that point, where investigations passed on to detectives that involved David Spanbauer. The first one being a Chicago woman who was visiting friends in the Wapaka area. As she was out for a bike ride in the countryside of Wapaka, a man driving a late model red full-size General Motors product stopped her and asked her for directions. She explained to him, "Hey, I'm not from this area, I can't help you." So she rode on. He stopped her a second time and he asked the same question, "Hey, can you help me find this?" She explained, "I'm not from this area, I'm sorry, but I cannot help you." So she rode on. The third encounter that she had with him was when he bumped her with his car and knocked her from her bicycle. He was in the process of forcing her into his car by gunpoint when another vehicle happened by, slowly enough that he knows that they saw him. He let her go and drove on. And the Wapaka County Sheriff's Department brought this gal to the Appleton Police Department for the purpose of conducting a composite sketch. At the conclusion of that sketch, I always had the describer rate the sketch. How close are we to a finished product? That how close does it look to the person that you remember on a scale of 1 to 10? And I was only able to get to a 3. And so I know we were a long ways off, and she was still too freshly traumatized from the incident to render a likeness of the perpetrator. She sat down with another sketch artist when she got back to the Chicago area, and that one was much more accurate because she had time to rest and time to settle down from the traumatic incident. Another person that Spanbauer was responsible for was the death of Cora Jones. Cora Jones was a young girl out for a bike ride in the countryside of Wapaka, and she went missing. So a search, when she didn't come home, a search started happening, and they found her bike, but no Cora. So if you remember, there were some Boy Scout troops that helped with some of that search. Eventually, they did find her body, not far from where her bike was found. Didn't find out much later that David Spanbauer was responsible for her death. His connection to Wapaka is that his family had property in the Wapaka area. Trudy Jeske was another person that died at the hand of David Spanbauer. I was sent to process that scene. It was up near Highland Highland Elementary School. Trudy Jeske was in Appleton for the summer for a job. She was visiting her sister and her sister's family and living with them while she was employed here in Appleton during the summer. The family, her sister and her family were up in the UP camping, leaving Trudy home alone. Spanbauer broke into the house and shot and killed her. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Spanbauer was apprehended, I believe it was in combined locks, as a peeping Tom. The car that he was driving was a red late model General Motors product, a Pontiac Bonneville. The car was impounded. He was locked up at Outagamie County Jail for being a peeping Tom. When investigators caught wind that he was driving this kind of car, because a car in the Trudy Jeske case in the neighborhood was a red late model General Motors product. So they were putting two and two together, and as pieces to the puzzle started fitting, they realized that we have someone that was very evil here and needed to be brought to justice. When Trudy Jeske's sister came back home, she could not stay in that house knowing what had happened. And there was a woman from her church that offered the sister and her family to come stay with them until they could decide what they wanted to do. The woman from the church explained, I know what you're going through because earlier in my life, I was the victim of an assault. So I know what you're feeling and what you're going through. So please come live with us until you decide what you want to do. Once they determined that Spanbauer was responsible for Trudy Jeske, more pieces to the puzzle started coming together. And Spanbauer admitted to killing Trudy Jeske. In his explanation of how she died, that he had a gun in his hand, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. She was in bed on the phone with her boyfriend who was up in the UP when the gun went off accidentally. The distance from her to the doorway where he was standing was 8 to 9 feet. When the detectives who found this out, after taking his statement, they asked me, you were up there, you processed that scene. Is this what happened? And I said, that's not what the evidence told me. The evidence told me that he was 2 to 3 feet from her when the gun went off and she died. Which meant he walked up to her, pointed the gun at her and pulled the trigger. How I know that it was that distance was because of the powder burn in the white comforter that she was using to cover up and to protect herself. I'm convinced that the reason she died was she could identify him. All of his other victims up to this point weren't capable of identifying him. So the connection that this woman from church has with this whole thing, how she was traumatized at the age of 18 was her aunt and uncle asked her to babysit for them so that they could have a night out. She asked the uncle, can I bring my boyfriend along and he can help me watch the kids? Boyfriend said, sure, that's okay. When the uncle and aunt came home, her boyfriend was in the process of assaulting her. The uncle pulling him off of her, at which time the young man turned and pulled a gun, shooting the uncle in the face. The boyfriend was charged with attempted murder. The boyfriend was David Spanbauer at age 19. And an explanation about why he was doing these terrible things was, you guys created me when you sent me at age 19 to that awful place. And at the time of his sentencing for all of these other things that he did, the judge told him, Mr. Spanbauer, I'm going to send you back to the cesspool from which you came. He ended up dying in prison. Another case that I worked on was as a forensic sketch artist, where I got a phone call from a detective from the LAPD. The detective was asking me to meet with this person, and it was a young woman who was out in LA visiting family. So I did. I called her mother and her, because she was 18 years of age, down to the police station, and it took me 2 sittings to render a likeness that she felt was right on the money. I overnight expressed, mailed the finished product to the detective. And faxes weren't around yet. We didn't have cell phones like we have today, so the only way to get that over to him, knowing that this is important, it needs to get over there, so it was overnight mailed there. 2 days later, he calls me, the detective, and he says to me, all excited, he says, 4 hours after I had your sketch in my hand, I had a name of the perpetrator. He was a college kid from Los Angeles. Not only that, but we were investigating 2 other similar incidents, not knowing there was a connection until we showed the victims your sketch, and they identified him. He was responsible for 3 different incidents. He was an evil young guy. I mean, he was burning his victims with a cigarette lighter to get them to submit to what he wanted. So he was brought to justice as a result of 1 sketch. That to me was very gratifying, and that's why I got into doing that. And so, any other questions? Yes?
Mark, can you talk about your background on how you became a forensic artist, sketch artist?
Sure. It started in high school. I was a doodler. So I liked sketching, so when I would be sitting in class, if we had some downtime, I'd be sketching things, just doodling. And when I got assigned to the identification section, I went to a crime scene reconstruction school. The instructor showed us how to introduce evidence through sketching. If the photographs that were taken were too inflammatory, judges could say, you're not going to introduce that as evidence because it's too inflammatory, and I don't want the jury to see that. We still needed to introduce that evidence so that they knew how much trauma was caused to a specific body part. So we did that, and that's how I got back into sketching. From that, there was a retirement of Bill Stewart, if you remember Bill Stewart, who did that prior to his retiring in 1990. And I just thought, I work in identification, this would be a perfect place to move into that, so I requested training on how to do that. And I went to several different schools honing that skill. And the most important thing was not my ability with a pencil and paper, but was my ability to interview and get that information from a victim. And it was being able to put them back into that position so that they could identify who they wanted me to know. And then the other part of that is soliciting the public's attention on identification of that unknown person. The very first school that I went to was in Chicago. The instructor was from the state of Ohio, Stephen Hale. And I redid a sketch of an armed robbery suspect when I got back, and I took photographs of that, Polaroid photographs, along with the description sheet that I attached to it, and officers were taking that and posting it in their car. And one such officer had it on his dashboard, and he had a guy in his back seat, and the guy asked, he says, who's that supposed to be? He says, oh, that's the armed robbery from the Clark station that we're looking for. And he said, well, you know who that is? And he gave him a name. Sure enough, that's who it was. So the system works. Not that it's always that successful, but there were times when it was successful, and that was very gratifying. What else do we have? This is Mackenzie, my lovely assistant. Thank you, Mackenzie.
Can you talk about some of the artifacts that are in the back that you came in?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I'm surprised there wasn't a question about the cane. The cane. There's a cane in the back of the room, and there's a framed statement in that frame. Ask me about the cane. So let's talk about the cane. And some of you may have heard about this. Monday, September 25th, 1967. Police are called to St. Joe's Catholic School. The officer who responded to that call is with us tonight. Rodney Helms. Can you just give us a wave, Rodney? Police are called to St. Joe's Catholic School at 202 South Elm Street. The school principal, Sister Illuminata, reports that first and second grade students found an unusual package while playing on the school playground. Inside a brown paper sack bound by string was a human foot. The package was turned over to police, who turned it over to took it to St. Elizabeth's Hospital. One of the hospital pathologists confirmed that it was a human foot with severed toes. Further examination revealed it to be fresh, that there was no decomposition and no maggots. A search of the neighborhood uncovered more packages of a similar nature. So St. Joe's School became the epicenter. And just like tossing a pebble into a pond and watching that pebble, the waves of that pebble expand, that's how the search started at St. Joe's School. So there were several packages found as the search went on. Word quickly spread, as did speculation. September 26th, officers led by Detective Lieutenant Bob Frailing went to the Macville dump from a tip that a garbage truck driver had made a pickup the previous day in the area of St. Joe's School. More remains were found. More packages were also found from as far away as Dagg's Restaurant. Who remembers Dagg's Restaurant? Where was Dagg's Restaurant?
East Wisconsin.
East Wisconsin Avenue. And what's there now?
East Wisconsin.
Scuba's.
Bar.
Yeah, Scuba's Poorhouse. That was Dagg's Restaurant in the early days. All packages and parts found were taken to the morgue at St. Elizabeth's Hospital for further examination. No identification was possible as the hands and/or head were not yet found. The case was broken in the afternoon of Wednesday, September 27th. Patrol Officer Darrell Berglund, following up on a call at 319 North Division Street from September 15th. At that time, resident Marie Schmidt was requesting officers to remove her husband, George, from the home. When told that the police did not have authority to remove him, nor did they have a place to put him, Mrs. Schmidt asked them to leave. When Officer Berglund asked where her husband was on September 27th, Mrs. Schmidt claimed that about a week earlier, an unknown woman came and took George to Milwaukee. Mrs. Schmidt further said that she didn't care if he was in a hospital, an asylum, or anywhere else, but she didn't want him back. Berglund then went to the upstairs apartment. Apparently there were 2 apartments to this structure. From the upstairs apartment, he was told by the residents there that Mrs. Schmidt had asked to use their basement incinerator. Apparently, both apartments had an incinerator in the basement, and the one from upstairs was newer and larger, and she wanted to use that. Berglund reported this particular behavior, or peculiar behavior, to his superiors. Detective Leo Bosch, a new detective to the Detective Bureau in 1967, went to 319 North Division Street to speak with Mrs. Schmidt. She would not let him in. He knew he had the right house because of the stench, the smell of decaying flesh, coming from inside. Further, as he spoke with her, he saw a butcher block behind her in the kitchen. He thought this too was peculiar. Chief Earl Wolf went to the district attorney's office, who was Nick Schaefer at the time, and requested a search warrant for the Schmidt property. At 11:50 p.m. on September 27th, Judge Gustav Keller issued a search warrant for that property to be executed forthwith. Now, there was some discussion of the detectives who were there at that time, wondering, should we wait for the sun to come up before we execute this warrant? The other detectives argued, he said, the judge says forthwith. That means right now. So they went knocking at the door. When there was no response at the door, they forced it. Marie Schmidt was subsequently found in the basement, incoherent, with a glass of wine, a bottle of pills, and a cord nearby. She was subsequently transported to St. Elizabeth's Hospital and admitted to the psychiatric ward under police guard. Digging in the Schmidt backyard and garden revealed more packages and body parts. The head was still unaccounted for. On September 28th at 4:20 p.m., in a box under a bush outside the Post Crescent office, officers found the head of George Schmidt. Unlike the other body parts, it was pulverized extensively. The face, however, was still recognizable. On October 2nd, 1967, preliminary autopsy results from the State Crime Lab determined that the body was dead at the time of dismemberment. Further, that all the body parts were of one man, identified as George Schmidt. Examination of the heart revealed that death was not caused by natural causes. Foul play was still a possibility. On October 6, 1967, detectives were finally allowed to interview Marie Schmidt. Detective Bob Frayling and Detective Leo Bosch, the old and the young, were assigned. She initially denied knowing her husband was dead. She later said that she walked home from shopping downtown and found her husband beating the family dog. She loved that dog, and this infuriated her. She explains that she took his walking stick away from him and chased him out of the house. Detectives asked her, how could he leave the house as he needed his walking stick to walk? She did not respond. Detectives asked a second question, okay, what part of him left first? Little play on words there. To which she had no response. George Schmidt was a butcher by trade. He did not work at a butcher shop. He worked out of his house. He had the tools of his trade in their home. Apparently, Marie knew how to use them. October 23rd, 1967, Judge Urban Van Susteren determined that Marie Schmidt was mentally ill and committed her to Winnebago State Hospital in Oshkosh. She was later transferred to Outagamie County Health Center. The district attorney requested that detectives take another try at interviewing her. After some time, the second interview never took place. Marie passed away in 1969. As for the cane, Inspector John Gosh retired on April 1st of 1977. In cleaning out his office, he asked Arnie, "Hey Arnie, are you interested in this cane?" Arnie asked, "Well, what's the story?" Gosh told him, "It's Marie Schmidt's." To which Arnie said, "Yes, I'll take it." And here it is tonight. So, Questions?
I'm wondering if Rodney has anything to add to that story.
Oh, yeah.
I think the following day, I was a patrol sergeant. When the first call came in for St. Joe's, I said, I'll take that call, because I was only 2 blocks away. Patrol, I was driving the paddy wagon, what we call the paddy wagon, I was a field sergeant, and there was a call about a package that was found in a window well at the back of St. Joe's Church. Apparently, it was found by the kids, and the kids must have took it to school and kicked it around, and then sisters told her to put it back where it was. And I opened the package, it was partially open, I opened it up and I looked at, that's not a bear foot, that is a human foot. And that time, I think we had news reporters right there right away. The following day, I believe it was the following day, I was still working the afternoon shift, and a call came in, a package by where the Spud Nut restaurant is, in the division seat, there was a ravine, and it was a package down there. Officer Herman was sent there, and I assisted him. It went down to the package, he stood up on top, I went down, and it was wrapped up in brown paper with string, and there was a hole in it, and I stuck my finger in the hole, and the fly came out, and I said, I think we got another package. I was told to take it up on top, and then I believe a climber at a truck came to pick it up and probably went to the hospital. Otherwise, I didn't have anything else, but that second package, I think, weighed about 25 pounds. Must have been an interest, I'm not sure.
Oh, wow.
Any other questions?
So, back in those days, how did people find out about things? It was word of mouth and the newspaper, and radio. So that's how word spread back in those days. And Appleton gained national notoriety because of that case. And it was my understanding that every officer on the department played a role in the search for more body parts. They were keeping track of this neighborhood has already been searched. We want you to go to this neighborhood and conduct a search. So the search continued until all or most of the body parts had been found.
Sure.
Yes.
How would you describe the cooperation between the media, like the newspaper, and the police department as you were trying to solve crimes?
Boy, that's a loaded question.
or maybe, did they interfere? Or...
No pun intended. There were times when they did interfere, but there were times when they were very helpful. Gorski was also responsible for starting a tactical team. And one of our very first tactical call-outs, we weren't doing a good job of controlling the media, and we let them in too close. So as they were describing blow by blow what we were doing was going out over the radio waves. And so the perpetrator also had capability of hearing what we were doing. We need to do a better job of controlling the media at that point in those types of situations. There were times when they were just very, very helpful. Bill Knutson was a reporter for the Post-Crescent, and he was close friends with a lot of officers, and a lot of the things that he wrote about, he was an advocate of the police. And so we worked very, very well with him as an example. So sometimes it was good, sometimes not so good. Yes, Barb?
From your historical knowledge, what do you think happened to the motorcycle program?
What happened?
Yes, because I see in some of the slides that they were instrumental way back.
And then somehow they got away from that and put everybody in squad cars. It was reinitialized by your husband. And that was a very useful tool. You could move around in and out of traffic so well with the the homework that John Nelson did in that program, and officers were getting them out and using them. And initially, when it first started, we had one. It was a Honda, which later became 2 BMWs that he found out in California, I believe. And he was responsible for getting them here. And it was reintroduced, and I think the demise of that was when officers were asking for special equipment while operating that motorcycle. They wanted leather gear. The chief at the time said, they've got a clothing allowance. If they need special gear, they can order that special gear through their clothing allowance. But that leather gear was very, very expensive, and their clothing allowance didn't cover all that special gear. He says, until we get that special equipment to ride that so we can do it safely, he says, we're not going to ride them. That was the end of the program. Yes, Rod?
Can I inject something?
Sure.
The motorcycles, remember the traffic bureau had all the three-wheelers that did the meter checking before the meter maids. They all had motorcycles. Some of them, I think even Roland Wrecker had one that's still in existence someplace.
Yes, and I think Rolly Wrecker refurbished that one.
No.
And there's another one that's being refurbished, and I was asked to come out to his house, and I took pictures of it, and as he's cleaning off the old paint from it, underneath the paint, it was very clear, Appleton Police sticker underneath the paint. And solo bikes were used in the early days for patrol duties and response to calls. And in the winter months, they were converted to three-wheelers by putting a sidecar, and even the motorcycles were used during the winter months. And that's before they had all the squad cars, because motorcycles were cheaper to use, cheaper to operate. Yes?
You tell them about call boxes.
Oh, yes, call boxes. Well, it should be, I should say something about the desk sergeants. Desk sergeant, in Arnie's opinion, and this is one of the things that I learned in one of my visits with him, was that desk sergeants were the ones who really ran the department. The department had a department head, the chief, but it was the desk sergeant who really ran the department, in that as calls would come in from the public that they needed an officer to go here or go there, the desk sergeant was the one who would dispatch them, and when they were done with that call, he would make his entry into the day book as to who called, what the situation was, and who he sent. At the conclusion of that call, the disposition of that call was given to the desk sergeant, who entered it into the day book. So, if you could read the day books and their handwriting, which you know is difficult, everything went into the day book before we have the reporting process that we have today. But the call box, when Arnie started on the department, we didn't have radios that we had clipped to our hip. Officers were expected to go out, that they were given an area to patrol on foot, and every hour on the hour they were expected to call in on the call box. Call boxes initially, I think, were police department call boxes, but later became fire department call boxes. So if you used the call box, you would get the fire department, and you'd have to tell them, give me the police station. Sometimes you'd get a radio call, and the desk sergeant would say, call me on a call box. He had an assignment for you, and he didn't want to give it out over the radio. So, but when Arnie started, on the hour you would call into the station. If you didn't call in on the hour, they would send someone out looking for you because something was wrong. So we didn't have, that was before radios. Call boxes were very important, and we do have a call box at the station on display, because when I started in the department in 1974, I was given 2 keys. One was for traffic boxes, so you could control the traffic lights at any given intersection that had traffic lights, and the other key was for call boxes.
Yeah, but still doing the day books, I find a lot of things are not put in there, but they're in Arnie's book, but there's nothing in the day books.
Well, and there were different books. There was the day book that the desk sergeant kept. Chief Prim also kept a day book of his own, and it was called Prim's Orders. And that had to be checked on a daily basis as well, because he would enter that into his book, indicating what officers needed to do. If there was special attention on something, he would have it in his book, but it wasn't always entered into the to the day book kept by the desk
Does the police
sergeant.
department have that?
Yes, we do have some of those.
Okay, well, I'll get to it.
I'm sure you will. Any other questions? Yes.
You still have the bikes.
Still have bicycles? Yes, we do. What we were finding, well, a couple of things, and this happened when Gorski was chief. He wanted to start the police school liaison program. He did so by abolishing the beat walkers. That gave him the manpower he did to start some of these other special programs that he wanted. He wanted to update the police department and bring them into the current day on how policing was supposed to be done, or how he felt policing was supposed to be done. In that process, he isolated officers from personal contacts on a daily basis with the public and put them in squad cars. Now you couldn't talk to an officer unless you'd call the station and get one sent to your house or to wherever you were, in a park or whatever. So he instituted the bicycle patrol program. I was on that bicycle patrol when I went back to the street, and you'd be riding through a park or through a neighborhood, and you'd have someone whistle at you, say, "Hey officer, you got a minute?" And you'd stop and you'd have this conversation. They had a question or they had a problem that they wanted you to address. And so it kind of initiated that contact, and I think that's when community policing and district policing came back into the picture, because Gorski wanted his officers to be assigned to a district or an area of town and wanted them to take ownership for that neighborhood. And that was the whole philosophy behind district and community policing. Yes?
How many miles a day would you ride on a bike? 5 days a week?
Depends on how hot it was. On an average, about 25 miles. And there was times when you would be riding with another officer, and we all went through bicycle safety school up in Green Bay, and showed us how to do police kind of things from a bicycle that you didn't learn when you were a kid learning how to ride your bicycle. You know, keeping the bicycle between you and a would-be perpetrator, and dropping the bike and keeping it between you and backing off and drawing your weapon and engaging a suspect. You know, those were things that we learned: how to ride steps, how to ride hills, and stay on the bike. That was an amazing program. And initially they were buying hybrid bicycles. Hybrid bicycles didn't take the abuse that we were giving them, and they had to up their ante and go to mountain bikes. And they were a much nicer bike, much more durable than what we had been using. So, good question. Yes?
So I'm just curious, you stopped with Gorski. How come you didn't continue on with all the chiefs from Gorski until today?
I didn't think there would be enough time. I worked with Gorski, and I saw the things that he did with the department that I started on. And some of those progressive programs, not that it didn't continue through other chiefs, but to me, Gorski was a standout. Appleton became known as a very progressive department throughout the state. And we were getting officers coming not just from within the state working for other departments and applying for positions on our department. We were getting officers from other states working for other departments, filling out applications and wanting to go through the process to work for Appleton because of the reputation it had. And it was because of that progressive thinking, because of that progressive policing that they were seeing, that they wanted to be part of. Yes?
Talk about the K-9 program and why it's not funded through the department, that it's a fundraising kind of initiative.
Rick Myers is the one that did the initial fundraisers, went to council and asked if they could have citizens fundraise for the K-9 program to start it back up. And they came up with, citizens came up with $150,000 in 2005. And we got Sergeant Matt McQuaid trained with the dog. And then for years, they paid everything, but now the city actually does pick up some of the K-9 program. So it's funded, I believe jointly, but I know that the K-9 fundraising is going on right now, right? And it's really important. The program does amazing things, and it's gone from 1 dog to how many? 5 dogs now. And those dogs are really keeping our officers safer. They're helping to get drugs and suspects and so many different things that we're really blessed to have them. And they're keeping the community safer too. So, but yeah, that was initially started in 2005 and they fundraised it all. And now they're fundraising again because it's grown so much and it's so important.
What does Dubin's dog do?
Okay, so we are up to 5 canines now. We have actually 3 that are pretty new as of this last year. So you have canine Quinn, canine Caleb, and canine Dracon. Dracon's the sweetest, so I don't know why he has that mean name, but they come named, so we don't really have a choice in that. But it is expanding so much, so we do continue those fundraising efforts. There are things that have changed within this past year because, as many of you know, Beth retired, and we, I kind of took that on as well. So it's Friends of the Pack. You may have seen us around this summer. Always kind of check out what we're doing because we do continue those efforts year round. But like you said, those programs are changing. We don't just have police canines. So we have 3 shepherds, we have 1 Belgian Malinois, and then we also have 1 black lab, who is a little bit of a different police canine. He's a facility canine. So he gets to do different things. He's trained in about 43 different commands. We like to say 44 because we taught him how to hug, but he's not allowed to do that outside. He can do that inside the department, but not out there. And so he also is trained in different pressure points, so he can actually lay on victims in a certain way, and they can actually help them like calm down. He's been allowed into the courtrooms to kind of help those victims who are testifying, anything like that. So he's a pretty special canine. He gets to hang out in the office all day if he's not being deployed to different schools or whatnot. If I ever bring kiddos in, I had a group from Fox Valley Tech in just a couple weeks ago, and they were like, if we see the dog in the hallway, can we pet him? And I was like, well, we have to ask, but that is a possibility. So we do have them around. That program is growing, so it's always a fun thing to be a part of. Yeah.
What is the cost to maintain a dog on a yearly basis?
Pretty expensive. If you look, so like if you look at the Friends of the Pack Facebook page, I just released like a, I call it a leash ledger, right? And so it kind of breaks down the different costs of those canines. With the 3 that we just picked up in this last year, that cost is pretty significant because those dogs come from their kennel. They're about 2 years old at that point. And then they go down to New Mexico to actually train with their handlers for about 6 weeks. So that is the whole cost of sending that dog down, that handler down, food, lodging, all of that for about 6 weeks is a major cost. You're also looking at making sure a squad is outfitted correctly for that canine. As you know, those squads are not like normal squads. They have doors that just can eject open from their handler. They have bowls. They're pretty much like all hard plastic on the inside, which I know like sounds mean, but they will eat it. So you have to be careful. So there's just a lot of costs that go into bringing those canines here, getting them certified. All of our canines passed their certifications this last July, I believe it was. So everyone's up to date and good to go. But yeah, there is cost to them, and like everyone, if anyone has a pet in here, pets are expensive to begin with, and these are not normal pets. They are working canines, so kind of up that a little bit.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So how long does a dog stay on the force typically?
Anyone else can go, but I'll keep going unless you want me to stop. Typically you're looking, it all depends on the dog. Typically you're looking at right around like 8 to 9 years old, 8 to 10. That dog is going to kind of tell you when it's their time. We just had canine Zool, if anyone remembers him. I always do it because it's from Ghostbusters, if anybody knows that. And so we had canine Zool, and canine Zool started getting quite a bit of arthritis in the hips, things of that nature, just kind of started to get a little bit snippy, just because he was uncomfortable. And so it's just kind of like your own canines, where those handlers and those canines are extremely tight. They see each other more than they probably do their spouse. They live with them, everything like that. So they kind of really start to just kind of see them not enjoying their work anymore, not enjoying being there anymore, and that's kind of when they start that retirement.
And those dogs stay with the handler then permanently?
Yes. They have to do they have to be symbolically bought by their handler. So a lot of times their handler will pay like $1, and they usually frame it and stuff like that. But yes, they do stay with them. I know Ian, who just retired this last year, is comfortably on kiddos' beds, reading books at night and living his best life. Yeah,
I'm just wondering if our APD canines are still training with other local canine
100%. Yes, so
departments?
monthly they have to do their training and like they have to kind of train together because finding a facility to train at is kind of difficult. So finding anything that's like kind of abandoned or there aren't people in, right? Nina, just Hoover Elementary School, we kind of got cleared to do some training there as well too because it's a school that's not being used. So finding a spot is super helpful. So obviously, if you find a spot to utilize, that whole canine team is going to be training. They also work pretty in tandem with if anyone's on duty and needs help, if anyone's off duty, anything like that too.
In other departments?
Yes, correct.
Training with other
Yeah.
departments.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they know about 40-some commands. I mean, I have a border collie mix that's 15 years old and has always been smart and goes out back, go out front, ride the car to the DP for the dog park, sit, stay. What else do they know?
Yeah, so that is specifically Facility K9 Edison. He's trained in all, he can actually like she was doing a little demonstration a couple weeks ago at a little Sunday school type thing. He can actually pull out drawers, he can pick things up for you. Really, the possibilities are endless. I've probably only seen him do half of what he's capable of because I'm only concerned about playing fetch down the hallway when I have a 15-minute break. But there's so many different things he can do. There's sometimes a lot of times between therapy dogs, facility canines, there's just the amount of things he can do are endless.
It's kind of like a C9 dog, they're trained to do.
It's amazing.
So many multiple.
Yes. And like I said, he gets deployed in a lot of obviously different environments that our normal canines do. But that's the beauty of it is that there's a lot of different things that we can send him to. You'll see him a lot of at times at like community events, like City Toucher Truck we'll bring him out for. Sometimes we'll bring him out for neighborhood watch groups, things of that nature, just really all over the board. He did a presentation with Mark actually one day at the Lions Club. So you definitely see him. And as school starts, you'll start to see me post him more and more as he starts heading out to those schools. Anything else? This is not my presentation.
Good stuff. One over there.
Oh, right one over there? Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if you would have any information on the death of Connie Belter from Greenville. Probably 15 years ago.
Yeah.
There's been posters all over about it.
I know of it. Oh, and look who our special guest is tonight. She just walked in.
I had a very long committee meeting for safety licensing that just got done. And it was an hour and 15 minutes beyond our normal time, so. But to answer your question, it's still an open case. Connie died in 2008, so that's been an open homicide. It's really, I think, our only ongoing open homicide investigation that's a cold case that we still carry and work on almost every day, quite honestly, and trying to follow up on any leads or generate any leads to bring some closure to that family.
So Chief, as long as you're here, I'd like to ask you, why did you eliminate the behind the desk people from 10 at night to 6 in the morning and then completely on the weekends? It is so frustrating now, trying to get through after 10 and on the weekends, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, those were really some of the tough decisions that we have to make in order to make ends meet with the city budget. So there, at times there's those tough decisions and concessions that we make that aren't always great from a service perspective, but are necessary in order to continue to bring all the rest of the services to the city that we need to deliver.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
Well, I just have to say, I'm just so pleased to see all of the people here tonight that are showing interest in our history, and I just want to thank everybody for being here. It's really great to see as well. And I'm sure Mark did a fantastic job.
to take a second because I know out in the audience there are other police officers or police people who worked at the police department. Beth, I see you, and have you guys stand up. Mark Motorson is here, Beth is here. So if you worked at the police department or you were a police officer of some kind, please stand up. We want to give back applause. Thank you. You are all so appreciated. So thank you all for coming out. Please enjoy the artifacts. And Mark, thank you so much.